Good afternoon. I want to thank everybody who joins the Ukraine Media Center Ukraine Forum both online and in the studio. My name is Olha Tomanova. Today is day 384 of the full-scale invasion of our homeland by a Russian aggressor, and I want to traditionally thank the representatives of all the mass media who tell the world the truth about our heroic resistance. Our brief schedule of events for today is as follows. At 14:30 joining us will be Yuri Sobolensky, first deputy head of Kherson Oblast Council, and we will be talking about the situation in Kherson region. And at 1500 joining us online will be Frana Kvyacharka, advisor to Svetlana Tsikhanovska, Belarusian opposition leader, and we will talk about the persecution of Belarusian opposition and the latest visit of Lukashenko to China. And right now we will be talking about Melitopol. Joining us online is Ivan Fedorov, the mayor of Melitopol. Good afternoon, Mr. Ivan. Good afternoon, Mr. Ivan. What's the situation in Melitopol at the moment? What's going on there? If there are any news for us, please give us a couple of details. Well, we have to touch a couple of issues. In the end of the last week, the enemy shelled the occupied territories by themselves very massively. There were 100 launches from our time of the city, and so-called Donetsk scenario. This is what they try to implement here when they intentionally destroy civilian infrastructure and try to intimidate our civil population. Another tendency that we observe is today the enemy starts another massive wave of maraudery and kidnapping. I'm talking mostly about the property. We see that in the businesses, in the offices, they started stealing the goods and equipment. They started removing the air conditioners and stealing the equipment with whole storages. The situation is difficult in Energodar, and according to the version of general staff and local population, they start to remove the equipment from the training center. And yet another thing I wanted to mention is the social situation. It's just getting more and more complicated every day. The healthcare facilities are not available to the civilians anymore. It's the only one for all the part of the occupied Zaporizhia region, and the enemy keeps taking more and more facilities, occupying them for their needs as the military hospital. And the last thing is obviously the passportization and the money disbursements that enemy promised, but they never fulfilled on their promises. Everything happens only with the Russian passport. If you want to get any disbursements, you can get them only with the Russian passports. If you want to get any permits for movement across the occupied territory, you have to get a Russian passport. Also, we see that there are lines for any humanitarian aid packages, and those lines they form from 4 in the morning. So the enemy pushes everybody to the situation when everybody has to go begging, and there is no other way for the people who are left in the occupied territories. So the situation with the shellings, is this the instrument for intimidation of our civilians, or what's going on? Well, first of all, we see the tendency that they do intimidate our citizens, and it's not happening for the first time. There were shellings like that before, but not so massive. Also, they perform trainings in the suburbs of Melitopol near Mikhailivka from the very morning until late night, and sometimes even late in the night, and it happens really to intimidate the civilians. What they're trying to do is they want to turn our civilians into beggars who have nothing to survive for, to live for, and they form those lines for humanitarian aid. And another thing, they are trying to intimidate them because They want them to just be under control. And also the enemy keeps walking around the dwellings, around the houses, to distribute those packages of humanitarian aid to the collaborationists who agreed to work with them. And that mass murdery that you tell us about, does it mean that the Russians understand that they don't have a lot of time left to stay there? Well, obviously we are afraid to talk about that. We want them to flee from our territory the soonest possible, but there's another fact that tells us that something doesn't go along their plan. They started communicating the plan for evacuation in Vasilivka to the collaborationists and in some other villages where they prepare the evacuation of their collaborationists. So there are certain signs that they prepare evacuation for themselves and their traitors, but we don't see any mass actions, and we don't see it happening all across the Zaporizhia region in mass. It's just happening locally in certain spots of Zaporizhia region. As to the Vasilivka checkpost that you mentioned today, is it still closed, or is it available for living for citizens to the non-occupied territory? Yes, the checkpost is already closed for 3 months. Well, some can go through it, but there is evacuation way through the occupied Crimea and then continental Russia back to Ukraine through a walking checkpost in Sumy region, and today our citizens from this occupied part of Zaporizhia region choose that specific way to go back to Ukraine. As to the resistance movement in Melitopol, do you have any news about that? How are their activities right now? Well, the resistance movement keeps eliminating the occupiers on a daily basis in Berdansk, Vasilivka, all around the place. There were situations documented a couple of days ago. Our heroic artillerists destroyed a Buk surface-to-air missile system, and that was a cooperation of our armed forces and resistance forces. And our main weapon that enemy doesn't have is that our armed forces, our special forces, know everything about enemy's location in the temporarily occupied territories, and this work is still underway. It continues in Berdansk, where another team of collaborationists was heavily injured, and the same thing is happening in Melitopol. We have questions on the floor. Irina Mamchur, Ukrinform, just yesterday you mentioned that the agrarians didn't have opportunity to sow. They've only sown 20% of the area. So my question is, do you know about any significant businesses like the research enterprise Melitopol Research Horticulture Station that was the leading grower of Melitopol's black cherry? Do you know what's going on with that enterprise right now? Who manages it, or that is it active, or God forbid is it destroyed by the Russians or any other enterprises like that? And I will have another question, if I may. Well, first of all, concerning specific enterprises, the state-controlled enterprises, all of them are captured by the enemy. And as to that one you mentioned, from the very first day of the occupation, the businessmen who were working under the Federal Security Service, who said that now they would be the managers and the owners of that enterprise. They would arrange the harvesting of the black cherry and the operation of the enterprise. So part of the working team started collaborating with them, and this is how it keeps existing until now. So the enemy tries to harvest our Melitopol black cherry once again, but I hope it won't be the enemy who will taste it this year. And regarding other agrarian enterprises, the big local businesses, within 2 to 3 months, some specific businessmen from Russian Federation who were working under the cover mainly of FSB, they arrived in there and they were controlling the removal of all the harvest from that enterprises, from those enterprises, and this is why we don't harvest a lot, we don't sow a lot this year, because their task was just to steal the harvest. And what about the management of that enterprise? Well, I know for sure that there are traitors among the management of that company, but I don't have the exact name of the manager. We were discussing it in detail, I just don't remember it at the moment. Another question is, do you have any information about the number? How many officials and representatives of local governments in the region or Melitopol district are being currently kept as prisoners by Russians, and what is known about those of them whom we know about, like the mayor of Dnipro, Yevhen Matveyev, who's been in prison for more than 1 year. Well, now in the temporarily occupied Zaporizhia region there are more than 500 people imprisoned. To say exactly which part of them are representatives of local governments or government officials, we can find out the figure, but I don't remember that, but I think it's not more than 50 persons from who represent the local governments. But I want to emphasize that today the enemy keeps transporting the prisoners from one place to another. If we witness the tendency previously, when there was a lot of prisoners near Vasilievka, they were the prisoners that as if they were deported. It was their deportation on camera, but in fact they were put in the trenches and worked there as the slaves. So now they're being transported to Melitopol and to occupied Crimea. And also today the register of the prisoners is being added by new names on a daily basis. And it's quite important, because the relatives of those who don't add their relatives to the register, they are the main problem, because those people may be just missing in action. This is why we emphasize to all the relatives, to all the families, that you have to provide the information of all of your relatives who are being captured and imprisoned. So, and about Matveyev, any news about him? No, I don't know news about him. I just wanted to ask for a couple of details. You were saying that the collaborationists are being carried away from Vasilievka. So do you know how far are they being moved? Well, I cannot say that they already started transporting somebody out of there. Today they just started warning their collaborationists that there might be evacuation, where it would be to Crimea, but for the time being there is no evacuation underway. What's going on today is maraudery and pillaging, but the evacuation has not started just yet. Thank you, Mr. Ivan, for joining our broadcast. I'm reminding you, joining us was Ivan Fedorov, the mayor of Melitopol, and our next briefing is at 1430. Sorry, we will be talking about the situation in Kherson region. So bear with us, trust in our armed forces, and glory to Ukraine.